When it comes to drawing yourself, there are a few things to keep in mind if you want your drawing to be recognizable as yourself. I have drawn avatars for myself a few times now and even did a tutorial for watercolors. I tried a variation of different styles and media, and as you can see, they are quite distinguishable from each other. Some come close to what I actually look like, and some are more stylized, or abstract even. So let's quickly talk about iconicity. Iconicity answers the question of how much does an artwork actually resemble what it is depicting. And that answer isn't a yes or no, it's usually a spectrum. For example, a photo that depicts every single detail has a high iconicity. A super stylized painting that depicts the subject in an abstract, almost unrecognizable way has a low iconicity. So the art style in which you illustrate yourself will also impact the amount of iconicity that you can achieve. But of course, at the end of the day, it's also a matter of execution. So if you use defining or recurring features, the drawing actually doesn't have to look exactly like you. With certain manga styles, that is hardly even possible anyway. So ask yourself, what is the iconic thing that makes people immediately go, "Oh yes, that's so you"? In my case, for example, I usually go for the grey hair color, the eye color, occasionally glasses and a certain outfit to use them as hints for the viewer that the drawing is supposed to be me. With things like your hairstyle, favorite clothes, accessories, tattoos, piercings, or basically anything that identifies you, making yourself recognizable actually is not that hard. And to make it even easier, for this video I want to show you how you can draw yourself with the help of a photo as a direct reference. For this video I've once again teamed up with Concept D, who make creator-focused PCs. They have sent me the Concept D7 Ezel Pro to create the art in this video, but more on that later. This tutorial is meant to be beginner friendly and useful for anyone who wants to draw themselves. Therefore we will do some tracing of our photo in the beginning, just so it's easier for everyone to follow, even for people who don't draw regularly but still want to create an avatar of themselves. Even though it might look like I'm trying to recreate a one-to-one copy of the photo in the beginning, that is not the goal here. Instead we want to have a base that contains our most recognizable facial features, so we can do edits later in the process, like make the eyes bigger or nose smaller to achieve that semi-realistic anime look. First I open the photo that I want to use for my drawing and lower the opacity. Then I loosely trace the facial features on a new layer. I start with the eyes, nose and mouth by just following the edges that I can make out on my face. With the nose it can be a bit tricky. Depending on the lighting it might not have distinct lines, but still there are differences between lighter and darker areas that I can make out. So I use those to transfer the nose on my sketch layer. The outline of the face is usually easier to follow. For now I draw myself bald as I only want to focus on my face, so I can create a close line art and leave the hair aside for later. With a closed line art it is easier for me to create a selection of it with the Magic Wand tool by selecting the outside of the line art, inverting that selection and filling it with a flat color on a new layer underneath my sketch. Next I create a copy of my photo, put it on top of that flat color and make it a clipping mask by checking this little icon here. So everything around my selection gets cut. Now I use the Gaussian blur filter. Together with the line art, this looks really cursed at the moment, but it will only stay like this for a short moment. It is just an easy way to have my color palette right on display without being distracted by the photo. To get a better understanding of the light situation and values, I fill the background with a neutral grey color. Also bright white background can irritate the eyes pretty quickly. Now with the preparations done, we can finally start painting. I have Alt as a shortcut mapped on my pen. Now I only have to press the button on the pen to quickly switch between the brush and the color pick tool. This way I can quickly pick up any color I need from that blurry blob and define the features again. For the first step you want to roughly add the shapes back in, so don't worry too much about little details. With the paintbrush I roughly add hard edges to make the face readable again. This is where my sketch is of great help to make out the rough features. I simply follow the line art when I fill the eyes with color or define the nose for example. In case you want to be sure to paint the features appropriately, you can also put your reference to the side of your painting area, as I did, just in case you want to have the exact lip or eye color for example. Everything that got lost in the Gaussian blur. Just use the color pick tool on your photo and add it to your painting. A great method to smoothen shadows and push colors in their right place is to use the fingertip tool. When you place colors next to each other, you can use the fingertip tool and create rough but also pretty precise transitions. It's my go-to tool to create soft gradients next to the airbrush. Back to the painting. Step by step I add more detail to my face, shaping and editing my features in reference to the photo. When I have a somewhat good idea about my face and I'm confident enough that I don't need my sketch as a safety net anymore, I merge the sketch layer into the color layer. This makes it possible to overpaint the sketch and I can slowly start getting rid of the black lines. Again, I use the color pick tool and a paintbrush to carefully integrate the lines into my sketch. The nose is probably the trickiest part, as it is more defined by how the light and shadows create different areas, rather than clearly readable lines. So I tried to make my sketch invisible there, while checking my reference photo for comparison. Another advantage we have, now that the sketch and color layer merged into one layer, is that we can make better use of the Liquify tool. Clip Studio only lets you liquefy one layer at a time, so if you happen to warp the color layer while the line art layer remains untouched, they won't really fit together anymore. So with both layers merged, you can push and squeeze it without hesitation to fix anything that looks off, without the need to draw it all over again. This helps a lot, especially as we want to draw ourselves as pretty anime characters, which requires some adjustments. In my case, I make the nose a bit rounder and softer, and I tilt and enlarge the eyes. During the painting process, I play around with my features, using Liquify every once in a while, to adjust the face to the look that I'm going for. After all, as artists, how we draw ourselves is not a matter of vanity, but an artistic decision. Don't you agree? Jokes aside though, these decisions, as you might have already guessed, are a major part in creating an anime painting from a photo. Often you will have to compromise and make sacrifices to strike the balance between making yourself recognizable and also keeping the typical anime style. For example, in my case, I wonder whether that beard shadow I have is really that important for the painting to stay recognizable. A bit of vanity helps to make the painting look prettier. It's not supposed to be a caricature after all. The key is to keep the rough proportions intact in order for it to still somewhat look like us, which is something we should have achieved by now by using the reference photo as a direct guide in the beginning. For the hair, I repeat the process from the beginning. I trace the basic shape of my hair from the reference photo. Try to pay attention to the flow of the hair with your sketch and follow it roughly. To add more of that anime vibe to it, I combine the single strands of hair into larger pointy chunks, which are typical for short hair in anime art. And maybe also because my hair is pretty damaged from bleaching, so I really don't want to get into the hassle of tracing all the crusty looking details. Overall, we want to draw a closed shape again, so I make sure to close any gaps with my lines. This way we can create another selection by clicking the outside of the drawing with the Magic Wand tool, inverting that selection and filling it with a flat color. We could now work with a blurred version of the reference picture again to have the color palette right on our layer. But in my case, I figure that's enough for me to just have the reference photo right next to my drawing to transfer the light situation. Equipped with the color pick tool, I pick the lightest and darkest color from the photo and roughly add them to my color layer. I sketch a few harder shadows here and there as hints for which strands of hair are overlapping. Then I merge the sketch layer into the color layer and create the roots that are visible on the forehead. I use the fingertip tool for that, and by doing zigzag motions I create little spikes. The blur that the fingertip tool creates makes the transition from skin to hair more believable. And with a few strokes of the paintbrush I paint harder edges on top, which help create depth. I also use that one to smudge my sketch, following the flow of the hair. Then I can add more shadows with the brush again to add definition. When the hair is roughly shaded, I use a texture brush that I will link in the description. By the way, I've been working with the Concept D7 Ezel Pro for the past few weeks now, and it holds up pretty well, no matter what task I throw at it. It's a really powerful machine. I'm usually drawing in Clip Studio on a rather large canvas, using tools like Liquify, or by doing a screen capture in 4K resolution for these videos. And it hasn't struggled one bit. I'm also editing the drafts for these videos on it, before passing them onto my editor, so I can definitely believe that you can make this your main device for all tasks for all your creative work. It comes with a pretty beefy graphics chip, which is super helpful for video editing and 3D applications, including gaming, if you want to take a quick break, I guess. For the clothes, I make the reference layer visible again. I create a new layer underneath what I have drawn so far and trace the lines of my shirt. But I don't quite like how the clothes fall in certain areas, so I adjust the line art a bit with the Liquify tool. I also use the lasso tool to select more specific areas and transform them. Again, it is useful to have the line art with no gaps, so we can easily create a selection and fill that with color for the shirt. Using the same method, I add color for the t-shirt on a new layer that is clipped on top of it. Next I start roughly shading again. As the shirt has a pattern, it is quite hard to identify folds and creases. My advice, in case you ever happen to draw pattern clothes like this, is to fully ignore the pattern first. Do the shading like there's no pattern at all. This way it's easier to focus on the light situation and not get distracted by the different values that the pattern adds. A few lights on the chest and shoulders and some darker tones around the neck and stomach and we are good to go. Once we are done with the basic shading, we can create a selection for the pattern. With the G pen I paint after the stripes that my reference shows me on a new layer. It doesn't need to be too tidy though. After all, we are allowed to have more freedom with our painting, and that includes a somewhat more messy look. Once I have created the stripes, I create a selection from that layer. And then I click on the clothes layer and copy what is inside that selection. Now I can change the color with hue saturation and adjust the levels with level correction. This way we don't have to draw the shadows all over again on the pattern, but we can copy them from our basic shaded layer. It also works in case you need to add other colored patterns, like these triangles here. I draw the pattern I need, then I copy a selection in that shape from the base layer that is already shaded, and then I use the adjustment functions like levels and hue saturation to give them the colors they need. You can also work with gradient maps and all sorts of adjustments to achieve the color of your liking. I use the same technique for the few spots at those cross sections of the stripes. First create a selection, then create a copy of that from the already shaded layer and adjust it with level correction or any other adjustment function you need. I fix some minor issues and add a few more details here and there. I also clean the line of my black shirt around the neck and also give it some shading. Then I try to tidy up the overall silhouette with an eraser. And we are done. Now if you happen to use Photoshop, there's one last thing we can do. The drawing should be at a point now where we can use Photoshop's facial recognition filter to liquify and adjust very specific facial details, like the tilt of the eyes, height of nose or forehead and such. There is a lot we can play around with, and we can use this to make our drawing even more recognizable by adjusting these parameters according to the photo reference. But why would I do that if I have the opportunity to draw myself? Slimmer face, smaller nose, bigger eyes. We can go full beauty filter with the drawing in this final step. So what do you think? Would you be able to recognize me in the drawing? Regardless, it is a lot of fun to play around with your features and to create an avatar that is on brand with yourself. Not only because it is a self-portrait, but also because your own art style shines through. So have you ever tried drawing yourself as an anime character? Do you go for higher iconicity, or is the style more important to you? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again to Concept D for sponsoring this video, as well as my Patreon supporters. See you in the next video.